Hey everyone, and welcome back to Chatting with dannphan. Today we're going to be talking about webcomics and my opinions on them, if it's actually worth getting into, especially if you are a comic creator yourself. You've probably considered maybe putting up some comics of yours for free on Webtoon or something. I have a lot of opinions when it comes to webcomics, and especially Webtoon. And you know, not everything that I say is law. I would encourage you to get other opinions. Part of what sparked this rant is that I recently watched Clownfish TV's video talking about how Webtoons is the future, and that came out recently, or well, you know, depending on when this uploads, that came out recently. I found it relatively shocking that a channel that would constantly say there's no money in webcomics to then post a rant about how Webtoons is the future of comics. But actually watching the video, I noticed that what they were really trying to say is that cultivating an audience is the method for actually getting buyers for your comics. And what they were saying is a lot of people on Webtoon built up their audience through their webcomics, and that's what gave them buyers for when they would do printing and merch and all that other stuff that they do. Because God knows, the ad revenue on webcomics is not super good. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the potential of Webtoon. Is Webtoon super good for getting an audience? I found that throughout the years, Webtoon is kind of worse and worse at actually getting you an audience, because if you're posting on Webtoon, you're going to be posting on Canvas, and that means that all of your stuff is going to be far from the homepage of Webtoon. And overall, you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of comics on Canvas, so yours is kind of going to get buried under a huge pile, and you gotta work hard to really make yours stand out. And there are a couple ways to do that. Granted, I'm sure that I know friends who could give you much better advice than I on how to stand out on Webtoon, but I find in most cases, people don't just pop up on Webtoon and get an audience from the website itself, but rather instead, they post on Webtoon and they promote it like crazy on their other social media platforms, and then that audience comes over to Webtoon. And it's only once that comic is trending that it actually starts getting recommended on Webtoon's algorithm or whatever they have going on there. But yeah, in most cases I find that there aren't a lot of people who get their audiences strictly from Webtoon. And you know, I kind of wonder, if you're bringing the audience from your social media, then you don't have to bring them to Webtoon necessarily. You could have brought them to your own website. And there aren't a lot of webcomic creators out there who still do their own websites just because it's kind of costly and ad revenue is shit. I would also argue that it's easier just to have everything on one website. Like, you have the free comic, and then you also, right next to the free comic, have a click where they can get the merch. But getting back to what I was saying before, I find that Webtoon itself is not the best place for getting an audience, but rather instead other social medias are much better, like for example YouTube. I think YouTube has great success rate when it comes to cultivating an audience. And I think audiences on YouTube are actually more willing to buy as opposed to just get stuff for free. Whereas Webtoon, people are on there essentially because it's free. But you know, not everyone is necessarily made for YouTube. Some people just really aren't good at making YouTube videos. They don't understand how the algorithm works. And I'm not saying that YouTube is the only place where you can cultivate an audience. Obviously, there's other social media places. You know, you can, if you're not good at YouTube, maybe you're better at making posts on Twitter. Maybe you're better at making posts on Instagram, or I don't know. But yeah, I usually find that through social media, bringing the readers onto Webtoon is usually what happens, as opposed to just posting on Webtoon and just automatically getting a bunch of readers. Now, as far as audiences, I've done my own polls because I'm curious about what you guys think about all this comic stuff. But keep in mind, the polls that I've done are roughly representing my audience here on YouTube, so I don't know about you guys. I have noticed that there is an uptick in people that are willing to read digital comics. When digital comics first started out, people were very about it, but I do think as time goes on, people are growing a little bit more accustomed to it, especially with, you know, piracy of manga being a very popular thing. So I think people will, throughout the years, grow more and more willing to read digital. which would theoretically mean they would be more willing to read webcomics. But keep in mind, I've also done this other poll asking people, you know, how often do you actually read webcomics? And as you can see, it doesn't look super good for them. Only 7% saying always, 48% saying that they're filthy casuals, and 45% saying never. They never read webcomics. Like I said, this is my own audience, so I you know, get second opinions, of course, but this is the audience that I actually care about. Webcomics are a little bit more difficult, I think, for most people to keep updated with. Sometimes webcomics just don't update enough, and other times when they do update, nothing actually happens in the update. There's no progression, and I think people can get really easily frustrated with that. They might wait for a few updates to cultivate before they actually get to reading it, and if they're waiting for a few updates, if they're waiting for something to actually happen in the story, then there's also the chance that they'll just forget about the story entirely while they're waiting and move on to the next thing. But yeah, with a lot of people I know, they don't really read webcomics religiously, unlike manga, which everyone always tries to stay as updated as they can on it. A lot of people who read webcomics are doing it fairly casually, and that probably means that your audience isn't really loyal, because the type of audience that's going to buy your merch and your print copies are the audiences who are super hyped for the next update and really keep up with everything that's happening in the webcomic. Casual readers don't usually translate to buyers, which brings me to my next point about the webtoon audiences. A lot of them don't buy. A lot of them are on there specifically because Webtoon is free, and they have no intention of actually paying for comics or paying for merch or anything. They're also casual readers. A lot of them don't always stay updated with the Webtoon after they follow it. I've noticed it all the time where you get like the first chapter of a Webtoon or first episode. It always has like a boatload of likes on it, but then you get to the second episode and then it's like nothing. It like cuts in half after that, because a lot of people just read the first chapter, think, oh, I liked it, and then they move on and forget about it completely, because apparently they just didn't like it enough. They're just bouncing and bouncing to different webtoons without really getting hooked onto any of them. Because they're free! You can just bounce from webtoon to webtoon, and it's no big deal. Unlike a manga series, for example, where you pay like $12 for the first book, let's say, and you damn well read it all. You don't just read the first chapter, toss it aside, and then buy a new one. So these are all things to consider when it comes to webcomics in general. And Webtoon, in my opinion, has been going a bit downhill of recently, and I've been very vocal about that as well, that I see Webtoon going super downhill and just really reading desperation when it comes to their homepage and how desperate they are for those clicks on these really trashy, low-tier, titillating series that they try to push. And you know, it's really funny seeing like all these different trashy series being promoted on the homepage of Webtoon, and they're not very well written or well drawn. Then you go on to like Webtoon Canvas and you just check out one of these indie comics and it's much better. But that's not the one being promoted, because Webtoon doesn't care about Canvas, is essentially what I'm talking about here. They only care about promoting their own stuff, their own bait series, trying to just get clicks from the younger audiences, the kids who've never seen a tit before. And I don't see that working forever. It obviously didn't work out for Tapaz, which is trash. It's trash and it's dead. They're just doing anything they can to validate their existence. So let's try to reach a conclusion here. I know that I've been ranting about all these different things at once. I don't think that webcomics are super worth it, or at least not worth doing a whole series for. I think maybe if you did a short comic and you posted it as a webcomic, maybe that's fine. That could be like a decent way of building a portfolio, especially if you're just starting doing comics. It's important to like have somewhat of a portfolio built so people can see your past work and kind of get an idea of what they're getting when they actually start buying your comics. Doing a full-time webcomic is certainly not something that I'm interested in. You're usually not going to be able to make it work unless you have cultivated that audience, and assuming that audience is actually an audience of buyers that are actually like interested in putting money towards what they like, which is not the majority of the people on Webtoons, I'll tell you that much. I've also noticed some people, they just post like maybe the first chapter of their comic as a webcomic, and then they paywall afterwards, and they say, oh, well, if you want the full version, you know, you gotta buy the PDF, or you gotta buy the print copy. And I think that's an interesting option. I think using webcomics as previews to comics that they could buy is a decent idea, because, you know, even when you're shopping in the comic book store, you usually like to flip through or read a little bit before you actually buy something. And a lot of manga, how they do their sales, especially like digital sales, they always post the first chapter or first 10 or 20 pages up free for you to read and check out and see if you like it. Some manga apps even like post the entire manga series free, but they have it so that you can only read it one time. And once you've like read it once, that's it. You have to like actually buy it to own it. Like I said before, I think digital comics there's going to be an uptick with as time goes on. I think people will be more and more willing to read digital, and in theory will be more willing to buy digital. So webcomics aren't entirely a bad idea, but I think that you have to work smart, not hard. Don't rely on Webtoon for your audience, first of all. So that has been my little rant about webcomics and if they are worth it. Overall, I think it depends on your situation and it depends how you want to go about it. I think if you want to do a full webcomic series and nothing else, then no, it's not worth it at all. I think that's way too much effort for something that's not going to give you a good return. But those are just my opinions. If you have your own opinions on the subject, leave them in the comments section below so we can all hear what you have to say and start a conversation. If you enjoyed my little rant, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more videos just like this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye! This video is sponsored by no one. Which is exactly why you should head over to burningstarcomics.net, where you can purchase independent comics made by me and my friends. You can even head over to Subscribestar, where you can join the fan club and get sneak peeks at new comics and art made by yours truly. Speaking of the fan club, let's give them a shout out. Program restart.